The challenge from the stars. The sun was just starting to dip behind the cornfields when Ruth Harrow heard the message. She was halfway through digging out a stubborn patch of pigweed near the southern fence, sweat streaking the dirt on her arms, when her old radio crackled to life. The voice that came through wasn't local, wasn't even earthbound. This is a transmission from the Galactic Empire to the inhabitants of Sector 12 Delta, also known as Earth. Ruth paused, leaning on her shovel. The pigs snorted uneasily from a barn. In the tradition of the High Combat Accord, your world is hereby challenged. Submit your strongest champion for single combat. Refusal will result in orbital purification. You have 72 hours. She stared at the radio, then up at the darkening sky. The stars looked the same, cold, distant. She muttered, "Purification, my ass." By nightfall, the world had changed. The news was everywhere: TV, tablets, holograms. Endless panels of scientists, military brass, and desperate politicians argued over what to do. The Galactic Empire had made such requests before. Other planets sent enhanced soldiers, cybernetic champions, AI war machines. None returned. The Empire didn't care who won. The challenge was about obedience, spectacle, and putting lesser worlds in their place. Earth was next. Ruth watched the coverage from her porch with a bottle of cheap beer and her boots kicked up. We send a super soldier, we die. We send a drone, we die. We send no one, we definitely die, she muttered. She turned off the screen. They wouldn't say it, but she knew the truth. Earth didn't have a chance. She stood up and looked out over the fields. Her hands were cracked, her back sore from a lifetime of labor. She was 47, widowed, and tired. But tired wasn't the same as beaten. She walked to the barn. It was still there, hanging above the workbench, covered in dust and grease. Her old reinforced trench shovel. Military issue, customized. Foldable, weighted, and sharpened. It had dug foxholes, trenches, and graves. And now, she brushed her fingers along the worn handle. "One more job," she said. The next morning, Ruth drove her beat-up pickup to the Regional Defense Center outside Kansas City. When the guards asked what she was doing there, she told them flatly, "I'm here to volunteer." They laughed. She didn't. An hour later, after 3 background checks, a retinal scan, and one very awkward call to a retired general, Ruth Harrow was inside a steel-reinforced conference room with Earth's last hopes. A group of overwhelmed, sleep-deprived leaders. "Mrs. Harrow," said the defense minister, blinking at her file, "you're a farmer." "Was a soldier," Ruth replied. "Now I'm both. You're not quite what we had in mind. We're considering a drone-piloted weapons system, or you'll lose. You've seen what they did to Mars and Ganymede. They don't care about power. They care about message. They want us to show them what we are." She leaned forward. "You send someone pretty, polished, engineered? They'll crush them to prove a point." A long pause. "And you?" the minister asked. "What point do you think you make?" Ruth grinned, sharp as a scythe. "I'm old. I'm angry. And I got nothing left to lose but my land. I'm the worst kind of human, minister. The kind that doesn't know when to die." They didn't say yes. But no one stopped her either. By that evening, she stood on the edge of the launch pad, suited up in old combat armor patched with duct tape and hope. Her shovel was slung across her back like a sword. A tech offered her a plasma rifle. She declined. "About all I need." She stepped aboard the Imperial transport pod, a sleek silver arrow sent down from orbit, and didn't look back. Not even once. As the pod rose into the atmosphere, she watched the fields disappear beneath the clouds. The brown patch behind the barn. The corn rows she'd planted herself. The solar fence she never fixed. She whispered a promise. "If I come back, I'll finish the harvest." And if she didn't, well, she'd die swinging. Arena of the elite. The Vardzar Combat Arena was a floating coliseum of polished obsidian, suspended above a churning red storm on the gas giant below. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, ringed by hovering nobles, warlords, and envoys from 100 alien species. Billions more watched from across the galaxy. And in the center of it all, standing on a raised stone platform surrounded by shimmering energy fields, was Ruth Harrow. She squinted up at the sky. It wasn't blue. Too many moons and stars crowded the horizon. The light here was wrong. Pale, flickering. Everything felt like it was watching her. And it was Earth representative. A voice buzzed through a hovering drone. Do you have a designated combat name? Ruth rolled her shoulders. Just Ruth. There was a pause. That is not suitably dramatic for broadcast. She hefted the shovel from her back and slammed it into the stone with a clang. The echo cut through the arena. I said just Ruth. The drone buzzed uncertainly, then floated away. Several alien commentators began debating the implications. Across the arena, the Empire's champion emerged with a fanfare of shrieking horns and stomping drums. Zarnok the Thousand-Limbed. He towered at 12 feet, a biomechanical juggernaut of silver muscle and spiked armor. Dozens of appendages coiled around him like serpents, some ending in blades, others in pincers, whips, or blunt hammers. His face was a single slit of blazing red light. The audience roared. Zarnok raised a hand and sliced it downward. The arena's gravity field surged. Ruth barely kept her footing. The announcer's voice boomed in dozens of languages. Let the trial of dominion begin. Zarnok charged like a freight train. Ruth didn't flinch. She stepped sideways and swung the shovel low, catching one of his lower limbs mid-stride. The joint cracked. He stumbled, but recovered fast. A hammer fist crashed down where she'd been standing, splintering the stone. Ruth rolled, dirt and dust flying off her armor. Another limb lashed toward her. She ducked and jabbed the shovel into the narrow space beneath the plating, twisting hard. Zarnok bellowed. Come on then, she barked, circling him. All those arms and not one good swing. He came at her again, faster this time. Whip limbs sliced the air. She used the flat of the shovel to deflect two, ducked a third, then drove the tip straight into the ground, kicking off it like a lever. She flipped over Zarnok's head and landed behind him. The crowd gasped. One of the nobles dropped their drink. It wasn't a clean fight. Ruth didn't have elegance or polish. She had grit. She spat blood, took hits to the ribs, limped on a twisted ankle. But she kept moving, kept thinking. She wasn't trying to overpower Zarnok. That was suicide. She was trying to frustrate him. When he roared in fury and struck with 8 limbs at once, she dove into a slide between his legs and slammed her shovel into a leg actuator, jamming it. When he tried to trap her in a cocoon of spinning blades, she threw dirt, literal dirt, into his sensors. Then she smacked him in the back of the head with the flat of her shovel, twice for good measure. Zarnok started making mistakes. Ruth backed away, breathing heavy. Her left arm was numb. Her visor cracked, and her side was bruised to hell. But she was smiling. Getting slow, sweetheart, she taunted. Zarnok roared and charged again, limbs flailing in a frenzy. Ruth waited, then pivoted and used her entire body weight to plant the shovel under his center of mass, catching his own momentum. She drove him sideways into the ground with a crunch that echoed across the arena. A sharp snap, hydraulics blown. Zarnok twitched. Ruth climbed onto his chest, grabbed the shovel in both hands, and with a primal scream, brought it down like a war hammer onto his core plate. Wham! Metal cracked. Wham! Sparks flew. Wham! The plate caved in. Zarnok's limbs spasmed, then went limp. The arena went dead silent. Ruth stood up slowly, blood trickling from a cut on her cheek, breathing like a furnace. Her shovel was scorched and bent, but still whole. She looked around at the stunned, silent crowd of galactic elites. Then she raised the shovel high over her head. The silence broke like a dam. Aliens screamed. Nobles shouted. Some stood in shock. Others began to cheer, hesitant at first, then louder, stronger. The chant began. Shovel, shovel, shovel. She limped back toward the exit platform as medics rushed the arena. A young Empire envoy rushed up to her, stammering. Earth representative, what are your demands? What message do you bring from your world? Ruth looked him dead in the eye. No demands. No speeches. Just send him up. Shovel diplomacy. Ruth sat on a cold marble bench in what passed for a detention chamber. No restraints, no bars, just a room of silence and judgment. It overlooked a city of glass and gold, impossibly tall spires reaching into a violet sky. The empire's capital, Varthzar. They hadn't thrown her in a cell, but they hadn't exactly welcomed her, either. She held her shovel across her knees like a priest with a holy relic. It was battered, scorched, and flecked with alien oil, but it was whole. Like her. The doors hissed open. A group of elegant beings floated in, their robes shimmering with starlight. Their heads were elongated, faces smooth and expressionless. The Emperor's Advisory Council, Earth representative, one said, voice like water sliding over ice. Your victory has disrupted tradition. The Emperor is displeased. Well, I'm not exactly thrilled either, Ruth replied, eyes narrowing. He sent that walking blender to kill me. I broke it. That's called defense where I'm from. You were expected to lose gracefully. It was the intended outcome. Ruth leaned forward, shovel clinking softly. You people always like to watch the small ones fall, don't you? Makes you feel tall. The advisors looked at each other, unreadable. The Emperor will see you now. The throne room was cavernous, lit by floating embers of energy that crackled like lightning bugs. The Emperor sat atop a levitating dais, clad in dark armor laced with silver filaments. His face was hidden behind a mask resembling a hawk's skull, sharp and gleaming. Earthling, he said, his voice low and resonant, you have made a fool of my arena. No, Ruth replied. I made a fool of your champion. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. You are no soldier, the Emperor said, rising slowly. No augmentation. No training for galactic warfare. Yet you won. I'm a farmer, she said simply, which means I know how to break hard ground and deal with pests. The silence stretched. The Emperor's hand twitched. You have a choice then. Submit, and Earth becomes a protectorate. Or defy me again, and your planet burns. Ruth stared up at him, her expression hard as iron. I don't make deals with tyrants. You hit one of our colonies. Europa. My niece was there. She was irrelevant, the Emperor said flatly. Ruth stepped forward. Wrong move. Guards reached for weapons. The advisors hissed. But the Emperor lifted one hand, halting them. You walk into my palace, wounded, weapon in hand, and insult my rule. I walk into your palace, Ruth said, voice sharp as her shovel's edge, after beating your best. That means your rule is already insulted. For a moment, no one moved. Then the Emperor did something unexpected. He removed his mask. He was humanoid, gray-skinned, scarred, eyes like twin voids. Very well, he said. If words fail, then let action decide. You and I, final duel. No champions, no arena, just truth. Thought you'd never ask, Ruth said, gripping the shovel. They met in the Sky Chamber, a private dueling platform high above the city. No crowds, no audience, just two figures, a weary human with a shovel and a tyrant in battle armor humming with power. You may yield at any time, the Emperor said. Sure, Ruth replied. You first. The duel began. He came in fast, energy blade slicing toward her neck. She ducked under and jabbed the shovel's edge into the armor joint at his knee. Sparks burst. He stumbled. He swung again. She blocked with the shovel's flat, the force throwing her back. Pain flared down her shoulder. She gritted her teeth. Step back in. The battle raged across the platform. Ruth used everything, leverage, terrain, unpredictability. When the Emperor lunged, she sidestepped and slammed his helmet with the handle. When he fired a burst of plasma, she kicked a chunk of metal into the beam's path, using the explosion to close distance. Yield, he growled, bleeding from a gash on his cheek. Nope, she panted. Not my style. She swept his legs out and smashed her shovel across his chest, cracking the armor. He staggered. She roared, lifting the shovel overhead, and drove it into his chest plate. The alloy screamed as the blade sank deep. The Emperor collapsed. Ruth stood over him, bloodied, shaking, but unbroken. Later, as the Empire reeled and its court tried to make sense of what had happened, Ruth sat in a high council chamber with new leverage in hand. I don't want tribute, she said. I don't want statues. The advisors listened, still in shock. I want you to leave Earth alone. I want reparations to the Europa colony. And I want seeds, tools, tech stuff my people can grow with. You want peace? That's my price. One advisor blinked. You want farming equipment? Damn right. And maybe a few bags of that glowing fertilizer. Looked useful. As she boarded the diplomatic shuttle back to Earth, now a reluctant symbol of resistance, Ruth paused at the ramp. A young alien emissary handed her a new shovel, its handle reinforced with stardust steel, blade etched with alien sigils. She looked at it, then at her own beaten tool. She handed the new one back. Already got one that works just fine. And with that, she disappeared into the stars, the seed, and the storm. The return to Earth wasn't triumphant. It was quiet. Ruth Harrow stepped off the shuttle into the soft light of an early dawn. The Kansas air smelled like wheat, rain, and dust. Real air, dirt air, the kind that clung to your boots and buried itself in your lungs like it belonged there. She took a breath, let it settle in her chest. It felt like home. Finally, a few officials were there to meet her. Cameras, too. But they kept their distance. She made it clear, no parades, no speeches, no damn medals. She wasn't interested in being a hero. She was interested in her land, in her pigs, and the harvest she'd promised to finish. Back at the farm, things were just as she'd left them. Weather-beaten fence posts, stubborn weeds, half-repaired solar panels. The kind of work that waited, no matter how far you went. The kind of work that grounded you. The barn door creaked open. The pigs grunted. Her old dog, Daisy, limped out and barked once, then settled into a familiar lean against her leg. Ruth dropped her bag, leaned her shovel against the fence post, and scratched behind Daisy's ears. "I'm home," she said simply. Within days, the world changed again, but this time, not from fear. Alien envoys began arriving. Quietly, respectfully, some with crates of high-efficiency crop enhancers, others with weather stabilizers, irrigation drones, and seed banks containing flora from across 6 systems. A rare few brought soil. Ruth didn't trust them, but she accepted the gifts. The deals were made not with Earth's governments, but with her. Backdoor diplomacy. Shovel diplomacy, they called it. She didn't negotiate like a politician. She bartered like a farmer. "Sure, I'll take your tech, but you'll give us the manuals in English, or I'll make you eat this shovel." They always complied. It wasn't long before others came. Not the powerful, but the curious. Farmers from across Earth. Scientists. Mechanics. Soldiers. Even former enemies. They came to Ruth's land because they'd heard what she'd done. Because she was proof that ordinary didn't mean weak. That fury, channeled right, could shape history. She didn't teach them how to fight. She taught them how to stand their ground. On the outskirts of her land, she built something new, a seed bank and community training hub. It wasn't fancy, just a converted grain silo and a few solar sheds. But it worked. Inside, she showed a group of young off-world visitors how to sharpen hand tools, how to till a field without killing the soil, how to treat land like something sacred, not something to exploit. One of them, a wide-eyed avian girl from the Rim Worlds, asked her, "Why do you still use the shovel? You could command fleets." Ruth paused, then stuck the shovel into the dirt. "Because this," she said, "is how you fix things. One scoop at a time." But peace was never permanent. 6 months later, news came. A rogue imperial faction, loyalists who rejected the Emperor's public defeat, were amassing ships in the outer rings. They called Ruth a fraud, called Earth's resistance a fluke. They wanted a new war, a correction. One morning, while fixing her irrigation line, Ruth heard the alert drone buzz low over her field. She sighed. Should have known. At the emergency summit in Geneva, Earth's leaders looked to her again. She was not in uniform. She didn't wear badges, but she carried the same battered shovel. "This isn't our fight," a diplomat said. "It's theirs. It's always ours when someone bigger decides to remind us who's boss," Ruth replied. "The only question is, do we wait for them to knock on the door? Or do we remind them this porch bites?" They voted unanimously to respond. Not with warheads, but with will. So Ruth returned to space. But she didn't go alone this time. A coalition of farmers, builders, retired soldiers, and students followed, humans and aliens alike. They called themselves the Cedars Guard. Not an army, a community, armed with more grit than guns. When the rogue fleet descended, they didn't meet polished warships. They met resistance like rust, slow, stubborn, unstoppable. 100 planets rose up, because one woman with a shovel had reminded them all. You don't need a sword to fight. You just need something worth protecting. Back on Earth, months later, Ruth knelt in her field, planting again. The soil was darker now, richer, thanks to alien nutrients. But the rows were still straight, still hers. A child from one of the rim colonies ran up, holding a spade. "Miss Ruth, can I help?" Ruth smiled and handed over a seed. "Only if you're ready to get dirty." The child grinned. Ruth planted the next row, and the stars watched in silence, remembering the day they learned fear not from fleets, but from one furious woman and her shovel.